I express my sincerest condolences to those present who have lost a loved one to a senseless act of violence. And I hope today we can have an open and honest dialogue about the firearms my colleagues wish to prohibit law-abiding Americans from possessing. I hope that we can avoid any inaccuracy, mischaracterization, and outright falsehoods that have plagued this dialogue for decades, actually. Unfortunately, many in the American public, the media, and shockingly, this very body regularly engage in the peddling of inaccuracies. Earlier this year, one member of this committee, who is the lead sponsor of the so-called assault weapon ban, conflated the terms assault rifle and assault weapon multiple times in a Dear Colleague letter seeking support for the bill. Assault rifles are rapid-fire magazine-fed rifles designed for military use. They are shoulder-fired weapons that allow the shooter to select between settings semi-automatic and fully automatic, which allows the operator to hold the trigger as the gun fires continuously or in 3-shot bursts. Assault rifles are subject to regulation under the National Firearms Act, and as such, they are functionally illegal and rarely used in crimes. Assault weapons, on the other hand, have been defined in statute and legislation as semi-automatic firearms. A year ago, a member of this committee said, just outside this hearing room, that, quote, "I've held an AR-15 in my hand. I wish I hadn't. It is as heavy as 10 boxes that you might be moving, and the bullet that is utilized, a .50 caliber, these kinds of bullets need to be licensed and do not need to be on the street," close quote. An AR-15 weighs between 6 and 7 pounds and fires a .223 or 9mm round of ammunition. It does not fire a .50 caliber ammunition. I would hope that these inaccuracies are just a case of members not taking the time to educate themselves on these issues. I would note, however, that the push to ban so-called assault weapons was born of the idea to mislead Americans. In 1988, the Violence Policy Center released a study entitled Assault Weapons and Accessories in America. In it, they state, quote, "Assault weapons, just like armor-piercing bullets, machine guns, and plastic firearms, are a new topic. The weapon's menacing looks, coupled with the public's confusion over fully automatic machine guns versus semi-automatic assault weapons, anything that looks like a machine gun is assumed to be a machine gun, can only increase the chance of public support for restrictions on these weapons," close quote. But let's look at the statistics. In 2019, according to the FBI, there were 364 murders committed with all rifles, not just those deemed to be some assault weapons. By comparison, knives or other cutting instruments were used in 1,476 murders. Blunt objects such as clubs, hammers, and bats were used in 397 murders, and hands and feet were used in 600 murders. The fact is that so-called assault weapons and high-capacity magazines have been used often in self-defense situations. The Supreme Court of the United States has recognized the right to self-defense. In District of Columbia versus Heller, the court ruled that the inherent right of self-defense has been central to the Second Amendment right, which is the individualized right to possess and carry weapons in case of confrontation, including all instruments that constitute bearable arms. Stephen Williford and his AR-15 helped stop the deadliest mass shooting in Texas history in 2017. Mr. Williford was able to confront and shoot Devin Kelly, who had just fatally shot 26 people in the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas. After Mr. Williford pursued and shot Kelly, Kelly ended up taking his own life. Mr. Williford likely prevented further casualties and was hailed a hero by local law enforcement. Similarly, high-capacity magazines have played a role in self-defense. On April 15, 2018, a Glen St. Mary, Florida resident awoke at 4 a.m. to a home invasion that was motivated by an apparent Facebook dispute. 7 masked and armed individuals forced their way into a mobile home where one of the residents was armed with an AR-15. According to reports, the resident fired more than 30 rounds during the event, resulting in one home invader being killed and others being wounded. These are just 2 of many examples of Americans exercising their constitutional rights to self-defense with assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Further, the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, Congress required the Justice Department to examine the effects of the assault weapons ban. The mandated study of the federal assault weapon and high-capacity magazine ban concluded that, quote, "The banned guns were never used in more than a modest fraction of all gun murders," close quote, before the ban. And the ban's 10-round limit on new magazines was not a factor in multiple victim or multiple wound crimes. A follow-up study in 2004 concluded that so-called assault weapons and high-capacity magazines were used in only a minority of gun crimes prior to the 1994 federal ban. Relatively few attacks involve more than 10 shots fired, and the ban's effects on gun violence are likely to be small at best and perhaps too small for reliable measurement. Democrats would also like to implement red flag laws, known as extreme risk protection orders, allow law enforcement which allow law enforcement, family members, or others with close relationships to the individual to petition a state court to temporarily remove firearms from an individual who they believe to present a danger to themselves or others. These laws trample on an individual's due process and Second Amendment rights because they permit the seizure of an individual's firearm or ammunition before the individual is given an opportunity to be heard in court. Typically, in order to deny a fundamental constitutional right, an individual must be afforded notice and an opportunity to be heard and present evidence. What other constitutional rights are my Democrat colleagues willing to take away without due process? I urge my colleagues to learn more about the rights they're seeking to abridge. And finally, let's look at the Biden administration's nominee to lead the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, David Chipman. Since Mr. Chipman left ATF in 2012, he has made his money lobbying for failed gun control policies, first for Michael Bloomberg, then for the Giffords Law Center. While at ATF, then Agent Chipman was the case agent for the Branch Davidian trial, according to his biography that he submitted to this committee last Congress. As I'm sure everyone knows, 76 men, women, and children were killed in that botched raid. Years later, while pushing for more gun control, Mr. Chipman allegedly falsely claimed that Branch Davidian shot down 2 Texas Air National Guard helicopters with 50 caliber rounds during the 51-day siege. In 2 reports, one issued jointly by this committee and the Committee on Government Reform and Oversight, and one issued solely by the Committee on Government Reform and Oversight, there is no mention of a single helicopter being downed. In the report to the Deputy Attorney General on the events at Waco, Texas, there's no mention of a helicopter being downed by any gunfire. It appears Mr. Chipman pulled the story out of thin air to justify gun control. The job of the ATF director is to enforce the laws Congress passes, this body passes, not promote failed gun policies. Madam Chair, I do have a number of articles that I will submit into the record, but I don't want to further delay the start of this, so I'm going to wait until the end if that's all right with you, and I think it'd be more convenient. And with all due respect to you and your position as chair of the subcommittee, and understanding that you are given wide latitude, and I respect that latitude in our rules, I regret, however, to report that I have noticed a starting propensity for the chair to take time after many of my Republican colleagues, a period of questioning and occasionally after the witnesses as well. I realize that you do have that great latitude that are given in the rules, but out of fairness, I request that if you do take that privilege, that perhaps you would grant the member equal time for a rebuttal or clarification related to the comments you make, or grant me time to comment on the statements that and questions that are made by Democrats as well. But with that, I do look forward to hearing from witnesses today a robust